during the recession in 2008. Everybody was trying to figure out what was going on. How did this happen? How did we come to this point where things fell apart? For the people who are on the screen, I'm on page 2. How did things get so bad so quickly? Well, a church member who was a CPA, who had been reading everything he could find, came to me and told me that he believed that the world was experiencing a crisis of trust. And that member was talking about a lack of trust in human institutions, in banks, in businesses, in government, in our human leaders. And he believed that that lack of trust had led to panic and greed and selfishness on the parts of institutions, leaders, and all of us. And he believed that lack of trust was quickly becoming a feeling of despair. Now today we're talking about temptation. We're all tempted by a number of things in life, but I fear the greatest temptation in our world today is the temptation to despair. The belief that we cannot trust God to walk with us. The belief that we are on our own in this world. The belief that anything that's happening in our lives is ours to solve because nobody and nothing else can help. The temptation to despair is the temptation to believe that nothing and no one, including God, can provide what we need to get through the troubles and the trials of life. I believe our greatest temptation in the world today is the temptation to despair, to mistrust God, to believe that God won't come through for us. Now, I think that lack of trust has been exacerbated since 2008 and the Great Recession. Because we not only have a lack of trust for institutions and leaders, but that lack of trust now extends to police officers and the judicial system, Congress, organized religion, and the media, to say just a few. I believe we're suffering from a crisis of trust, and the crisis of trust easily becomes despair. Despair is the belief that we and we alone can deal with the trials of life. Despair is the belief that nothing can fix the problems. Despair is that temptation that separates us from our confidence in God and our belief in others. We succumb to despair when we don't trust anyone or anything to help us fix the problems and trials in our lives. We succumb to despair when we believe that we are alone and nobody cares. We succumb to despair when we forget how present God is and how much God cares for us. We succumb to despair when we have just tried to do too much for too long by ourselves. And we can succumb to despair when we're empty in body and soul. Making sense so far? And that's the temptation Jesus faced out in the wilderness. Yes, it was the trial of making stones into bread, the trial of going to a highest height and jumping off to see if God would take care of him, the temptation to worship evil and be able to control all he saw. But the temptation that we have in common with Jesus at that moment is the temptation to despair. Now, the temptation to despair has the greatest chance of overtaking us when we are empty in body and soul. So when we're tempted to despair, the first thing we need to do is find something relatively healthy, but mostly comforting to eat and to drink. Because it's hard to trust God, trust me, when you're hungry. What else do we think about? So first thing is take care of our bodies. And then it's time to take care of our souls. You see, the temptation to despair wants us to believe that we cannot count on God. We can't trust God. So after eating something, it's time to write down a list of things that we know to be true about God. A list of things that we believe with all of our hearts to be true about God. What are some of the things we believe to be true about God?
His love.
I'm sorry?
His love.
God's love, it's there. What else?
Faithfulness.
God is faithful. Yeah, God doesn't walk away just because we're having a bad day.
acts in his own time and way.
God acts in God's own time and God's own way, absolutely. What else?
Spring will always come.
Spring will always come. That there may be a winter in our lives, but a spring will always come. That's that whole Good Friday Easter thing, right? Yeah. For every Good Friday there is an Easter.
He promises life eternal.
That God promises life eternal. There's new life for us in this world, and definitely eternal life for us in the next. Yes. I have 3 that I use, but start making your own list of things you know to be true about God. Mine are: God is trustworthy, God loves me, and God cares. Because when I'm tempted to mistrust God, I have to know God is trustworthy. I have to remind myself of that. A while back we talked about finding your 3 core beliefs. Things that you absolutely believe about God, yourself, and the world. Who found their core beliefs? Well, that was a worthwhile assignment. Well, if you didn't find your core beliefs, it's time to find them now, because when we are in despair, we need to know what we believe at our very core. Mine are: God is in charge, stuff happens, and all is well because God is in charge. When we find ourselves tempted to despair, we have to go back to those things we know to be true about God and about God's connection to us. Because when we are tempted, the most important thing we can do is replace our thoughts of temptation, our thoughts of doubt and mistrust, with thoughts of faith and trust. So list those things we know about God to be true. Find your 3 core beliefs. Those are antidotes to temptation. Those replace the thoughts of God isn't there with God is there. Because, friends, we face a lot of temptations in life. Girl Scout cookies are the least of it. We face a lot of challenges and trials in life as well. And it's tempting to succumb to the temptation to despair. We can do that, or we can trust God. Trust God to help us face the temptations, the trials, and the problems in life. Despair robs us of life, while trust in God gives life to us and to our world. On this first weekend of Lent, it is time to push away the temptation to despair and fill our hearts and our minds with God. It's time to ask God to fill us with the power and presence of Jesus our Christ, who faced temptation with trust in God. On this first weekend of Lent, let's open our hearts to trust in God and open our lives to the sacrament of Holy Communion. I don't think it was